Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another virtual winter seminar with fantastic sport fishing and Grimsby tackle. For those that don't know, my name is Mark Penner, and we've got Shane Toms here as well. For those that don't know, I'm the manager currently at Grimsby Tackle. Shane is the owner-operator of Fantastic Sport Fishing, and we've been doing a whole bunch of different seminars for, I think this might be the 8th or 9th year now, I think, Shane.
Yeah.
We've done different formats, different topics over the years. And the last couple of years, we've kind of been forced into this virtual format, but we're still making a go of it nonetheless. It's great to see a bunch of new and familiar looking names and faces here. Just a refresher for those, everybody is on mute, but we appreciate your participation, and you can jump in with a question or a comment using the chat function at the bottom of your screen. And when the time is right, we will get to it. Don't be alarmed if we don't answer you right away. We do see them coming in, and we will get to them. And we appreciate all the questions. Because the goal of these seminars, regardless of your experience or the amount of time that you've put in on the water, we just want to make sure everyone is comfortable and confident and pointed in the right direction for the season ahead. We know that there's many different ways that you can go about, fishing both on Lake Ontario and Lake Erie. And Shane and I are just kind of sharing our experiences and, what we have experienced success with and what we're comfortable with. It doesn't mean that there's not other ways or maybe better ways to do things, and that's fine. And we're always learning ourselves too. I'm constantly, watching as many videos and reading articles and trying to sharpen myself too, because you never do stop learning. You're always experiencing new and different things out on the water. Isn't that right, Shane?
Yeah, it absolutely. It feels that, every year it kind of throws you through another, time where you're going to have to figure things out again. And every year it seems to be a bit of a challenge, especially in the past few years, it seems. But yeah, it's definitely a constant learning experience. You never know enough, it seems.
Yeah, every year or so, you're sometimes catching fish in different spots at different times on different baits than you were the previous year or the one before that. There might be some commonality, but it's very rare that you have things lining up, week to week how they were the previous year.
Yeah, probably the biggest advantage I would say in recent years is really just kind of developing a good network of folks around you that are trying to seek good fishing as well. And if you can get within a circle of good friends to be able to do so, it makes a huge difference. Points you in the right direction.
Absolutely. That's why, we both and many others have always encouraged those that are on the newer side of things to, if possible, join a local fishing club wherever you are. All around Lake Ontario and parts of Lake Erie, there are various clubs that, not too far from your place that can suit your needs. Down this way, we've got the St. Catharines Game and Fish Association, the Straight Line Anglers Club, the Golden Horseshoe Outdoors Club, the Stelco Anglers Club, DeFasco. There's a whole bunch right there in the Golden Horseshoe. And then going around the lake, you've got the Halton Regional Salmon and Trout Club. Port Credit has a club. There's the Metro East Anglers, and then going out further east, there's the Central Lake Ontario Club. So there's one nearby, and it's good to link up with other anglers and share information with, for sure. And maybe even get involved with some community projects if time allows.
Sorry, I'm just replying to a message here.
All right.
Is someone looking for the seminar?
Oh, okay, yeah.
There we go. Okay.
All right. Well, we're going to jump right in. We've got a few of these seminars planned over the next couple months. Probably every 2, maybe 3 weeks, we're going to have a different one. This one is going to focus on the springtime. So from mid-March to about late May, early June. And then later we will have another seminar that will focus on the other half of the season from early June through September, let's say. And then I think we're going to do 2 on Lake Erie as well, an early season one, and then a mid to late season one as well. So stay tuned for the dates for those to come. But we assume they're going to be probably every second or third Friday night, and that should bring us to about early mid-March or so. As well, if you haven't already, subscribe to the Grimsby Tackle YouTube channel. This seminar is being recorded and will be uploaded there shortly after. We've got some that we did last year as well up there, as well as some other little informative tidbit videos, and we're going to be doing some more too. So there might be some subjects or terminology that gets discussed tonight that you might have further questions about, maybe about different types of line or setups or so many other things. And we're going to be doing a whole bunch of little 5 to 10 minute videos as well to add some useful content there to help get everyone through these next couple months of winter and get ready for the season ahead. So I think that's it for the preamble. We're going to jump right into it now. And so when we talk about spring fishing, it's a time of year that I always look forward to for many reasons. It's the start of a new season. For me, it's, there's a lot of tradition behind it, fishing down here in the Niagara shoreline. It's for me and my dad and many others. The beginning of the year, we're all trolling along the shallows for the most part. The Salmon Derby put on by the St. Catharines Game and Fish has been going on for over 45 years now, and it draws a big crowd. The fishing can be very good as far as numbers go on certain days. And I think one of the best parts about the early spring fishing is almost anyone can get in on the action, regardless of how much or how little gear you have. Even if you're not a full-time Great Lakes troller, if you spend most of your warm part of the season maybe up north or on different water bodies, you can still get out for a few weeks with limited gear in the shallower water and get into some pretty good fishing. Mm-hmm. So we're going to focus mostly on Hamilton to the Niagara River, as far as that about 40, 50 mile stretch of shoreline. And there can be some timely differences where some areas of those shorelines can produce a little bit better than others. And we'll discuss that and how they're impacted by weather and wind and water temperature. I'm going to kind of break this down. I think I've got into about 4 different time sections. And sometimes each of these time periods can last as little as 2 weeks before transitioning to the next, or they might last a little longer. And there certainly is overlap where they kind of go back and forth again, depending on the weather. So we're going to start at mid-March till about early April. And you generally get started when the ramps are accessible on, let's say, what a normal year is. And that usually is middle to late March. Generally, the only thing stopping us from getting out previously is if the harbors and the ramps are frozen, or if there's a big bank of snow. If we have had heavy snowfall throughout the winter, that kind of prevents us from getting out. But so usually it's then, and we're fishing very shallow. For the most part, for this time period, we're talking from the shoreline to about 15 feet or so for a couple 2 to 3 weeks. And we're generally targeting brown trout. Sometimes you do get the odd rainbow, and there are Lakers around too. The Lakers will be in that shallow water, but there often is a lot more of them out in about 40 or 50 feet of water. For those guys that aren't equipped or don't like trolling right in tight to shallow water, you can get out in that 40, 50 foot water and usually get into a bunch of lake trout. As far as setups go, you want to keep your baits high. Monofilament lines are the best, and we fish those on planer boards. If you have braid outfits, like if you're more of a Lake Erie angler, they will work too. If you splice in fluorocarbon leaders, about 10 to 15 feet, 10 to 12 pound test would be ideal. And we're fishing with planer boards because we want to get away from the boat and cover water, and especially when you're trolling up in shore, your boat might be in about 8-9 feet of water, but you might want to try and get your your shoreward lines in about 5 to 6 feet of water. And the monofilament line is best because when you're using the shallow diving stick baits, they won't go, you want to keep them up high. The fish are going to be up in that top part of the water because that's where it's going to be slightly warmer. As far as the location goes, what we're looking for is colored, ideally a green or lightly stained water. And Shane's got a picture we're going to share of what an ideal, what the water looks like.
Now just bear with me here while I share the screen.
Yeah.
All right, sharing screen. Okay. And just bring up. So this is basically what Mark has mentioned is typically while you're driving down the highway, you probably see a good, nice coloration of the water, but typically you get that brown water in close, especially if we've had some onshore breeze or lots of outflow from some of our nearby creeks. My guess is this picture here, Mark, I'm just going to guess, is probably near Charles Daly. Am I right?
Yeah, I think I actually took that picture from the Beacon Marina. I took it just after the weigh-in of one of the Ken Fisher derbies from mid-April one year. And the view is it just illustrated perfectly kind of what kind of water you're looking for. You know, it always doesn't set up like this. Sometimes it's just brown and very little green water and then blue, or, you know, it can vary in different bands, but, you know, that's a nice traditional spring setup of the water there. So, but
Yeah.
definitely, yeah, go ahead, Shane.
No, just going to expand on, we often hear the question of, do you fish the mud line? That's almost like cliche when it comes to spring fishing. And I kind of like to, maybe break that down a little bit, because I think some people kind of define that a little bit differently. The mud line for me is certainly the edge of the brown going to green. Okay. But, people may actually see the green going to dark blue, the mud line as well. It really, as Mark had mentioned, is really how big or how wide the swath of whatever brown, green, or blue outward you have. So in general, you usually find, the brown water is typically the warmest water. Usually is the outflow from creeks. The only exception to that is after a very strong onshore breeze, where the cold, let's say, center of the lake has been blown in over the course of a storm event, and it mixes in cold water, but it's also dark, that brown color along the shoreline. That's about the only exception. But typically your brown is typically the warmest water because it's the runoff water coming down to the creeks. Green water is kind of that mix of temperature, and then that cold blue, dark blue water is generally the icy cold water. And it generally, if anything, its temperature stays almost the most stable going outward from the point where it gets icy blue. From a fish's standpoint, what we tend to think about these colorations is brown water obviously gives the fish the most security. Okay, they're able to sit into that brown water and just kind of relax. But they may also find it difficult to feed. So there's drawbacks, right? So the fish may find security there, but they'll often not have a perfect snare to be able to chase down baits. From an angler's perspective, that really means bonking them on the head, or using large profile baits, or baits that have, a good amount of commotion to be able to bring fish in to see them, such as rattles and body baits and that sort of thing. Green water is kind of that area where it provides a bit of security. It gives them enough water clarity to see fish from at least a foraging distance. They can track down prey. But unfortunately, probably the biggest pitfall is everyone knows the green water holds the most catchable fish, and it usually receives the heaviest boat traffic. The dark blue is obviously where the least amount of security. It's the crystal clear water. The fish feel vulnerable, and with the exception of going deep, generally that clear water just doesn't seem to hold fish near the surface or in catchable range. You tend to have to go deep or be more stealthy in your ways of catching those fish in the blue water. Of course, those fish can track bait from a mile away. Like they got crystal clear water, and of course, because it's usually the least productive for catching fish, you don't normally have boat traffic. So, considering all of these factors, if there's a lot of boat traffic in a particular, weekend of fishing, you may want to consider that either the brown water could potentially be holding those fish that are, I guess, a little gun shy of all of the big outboard motors going by, or they slipped out into that blue clear water, icy cold water, and maybe sounded into the depths. Mark?
Yeah, no, that's great, Shane. Thank you for expanding on that. So let's go to my next picture that I had there, Shane. I think I probably had 2 or 3. Oh, not that one. Those are the planer boards there, I think. Yeah, the body baits. Yep.
Yeah.
So there's one shot of some of the baits that we do use when we're fishing in 15 feet or less. And I just wanted to show. So we've got some natural baits there. Some of those are some of the live target smelts in their smaller sizes. Those work pretty good, when the water is a light green or clear. Even when it's a deep green water, those baits will work very good. Sometimes though, as you can see, Live Target and some other lure manufacturers too, they have similar size baits, but in different profiles. So on the left, we've got the straight jerk bait style on the top left. I think that's the deep diving model. And then on the right side is the shallow diving model of the same profile. Then underneath, we've got a deep and a shallow diving of their small banana baits too. When you're fishing in the very shallow water, you want to use the shallower divers as well, because you can still stretch them back, with 100 feet of, 10 to 15 pound test monofilament line, and you don't really risk hitting the bottom. The same when you're using the Rapala baits or any bait with a short diving bait. But if you want to get them down a little bit more, then you might want to use the deeper diver ones as well. And sometimes too, there could be a variance in action between the deeper diving baits or a shallow diving bait. No different than like a reef runner. They've got the deep diving ripsticks and then the shallow running ripsticks as well. But yeah, and then we can slide over to the next one there. There's those are more of the salmon ones. I have another one, I think, Shane. One more.
I think that was it for body baits.
I think I had, okay, I thought I had one more. That's okay. We'll slide back. So there's some of the other ones. Those ones will catch browns too as well, but those are generally what we'll use more when we slip into that next section of water. So just to give everyone a kind of a breakdown of what a typical 6-rod spread can be. And of course, this is all dependent on what type of equipment you have available to use. But for me, when I'm focusing on that water, and if I have 6 rods to use, I'll typically have a planer board on the outside of each side with a monofilament line with a shallow diving bait, and it'll be 50 to 100 feet back, kind of depending on the day. And I want those to be pretty high. I only want those to be about 3 to 5 feet down. One bait that I've really come to like the last couple of years are the bay rats. They're a nice durable bait with a decent hook on them, and they come in an S3 model now, and so they won't go. You can let out 100 feet of line, and it won't go any deeper than 3 feet. So that's really nice when you're trying to run it up along the beach there. And then so yeah, or you can have, you know, like a small jointed Rapala or a live target or a mini reef run or any bait like that, or an old Rebel. Then my two inside planer boards will have similar baits, and maybe one will be a deeper diver. Again, you kind of play it by ear depending on the day, and you mix up your colors until you come up with a pattern. And then if I have two more rods to use, sometimes just using two boards aside is pretty manageable, and it's all you need. But you know, if it allows, then maybe I might have a downrigger with a spoon stretched back maybe 50 feet, but I only have the cannonball like 3 to 5 feet down, again depending on how deep we are. And then with a light flutter spoon, we can slide back to that one slide there, Shane, that had this right there. Yeah. So you see, there's some. This is a time of year too where some of the really old spoons are still some of the best ones to use. You know, if you have some old Evil Eyes or Flutter Chucks, and anything that's light and will run nicely at, you know, 1.8 to 2.2 miles an hour will work real well. You know, the small Michigan Stingers or the Dreamweaver Super Slims. Again, you know, in the colored water, brighter colors, and in the clearer water, a little bit more natural. And then maybe on my sixth rod, I would have maybe a small diver, and I've got a picture of some divers, we'll show them later, but the really small divers, I just run that on a braid or a monofilament line, not very far, sometimes, you know, just 20 or 30 feet back of the boat, because browns aren't always shy and timid fish. They are pretty aggressive predators by nature. So some of them do get pretty curious, and they will feed close to the boat. So that's what a typical 6-rod spread would look for me, at least when I'm fishing in, you know, 15 feet of water there, you know, around the end of March or maybe the first week of April. Do we have any questions, or do you have anything to share on that part, Shane?
No, I was actually observing how you displayed some of your photos. And one of the things I wanted to make mention of is you can almost do this form of collection of baits based on conditions. So as the water clears, you're probably wanting to go to more of a natural finish, very similar to what you see here on the screen. You know, these are live target, very natural looking baits. But, you know, when you get into that dirtier water or low light conditions, much of what I see in this collection seems to appeal to me. You know, you get that fire tiger looking colors, lots of chartreuse, a bit of green. It seems to draw a lot of attention, especially in the spring, and especially on overcast days and with water clarity, maybe, you know, a little more on the green to brown side.
There's no questions on that time frame. We're going to kind of shift now into the next period, which can be considered early April to about mid-April. And generally, you know, on what we can say most normal years, you know, the water is slowly warming up. We're getting into the low 40s for temperature, and we're fishing now 15 to 30 feet of water. And this is when we start to see some kings generally showing up. More often than not, it's usually around the Charles Daly to Port Dalhousie area. You know, every so often we do hear of some people that intercept, you know, the kings from deeper water as they're coming in from the winter depths. But more often than not, we do see scads of kings being caught in that 15 to 30 feet of water when we get around 42, 43 degrees for the most part.
If there's any time frame that it's probably my favorite time to fish kings is when they are in that zone. They first arrive, that first 2 or 3 weeks is my favorite.
Yeah, my favorite is actually the next one, and we'll get to that. But I do enjoy this one because, you know, we can get into a mixed bag of species in that shallower water. You know, the kings are in. You still have a lot of brown trout around. You know, there is Lakers in the mix, and you get the odd rainbow coming and going, either running up to their spawning river or dropping back out. So, and even the odd coho starts to show themselves as well. So, in this water, it's, like any time, but especially now it's susceptible to the winds, of course. Maybe Shane, if you want, you can kind of expand on that. We can talk about what we experienced this year. That Grimsby to Jordan water, it didn't last very long at that time of year. And there's different. This past year was kind of different. We touched on it in our recap session that we did previously. We had very clear water during that stretch, and it was because the water was so low. I don't think there was just a lot of nutrients being stirred up, and it seemed like all the green water was kind of down by the river.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Maybe what I'll do a little screen share, because I love using maps to be able to kind of describe this kind of stuff a little bit better. So I'm just going to bring up Navionics, and we'll be able to see it on the map, just kind of giving a bit of a spatial reference to some of our description.
Mm-hmm.
So, generally, you have the Niagara River here on the far east. The Niagara Bar, you can see quite a bit of structure that is developed there. And then as you go further and further west, you get some embayments and some excellent little shallow water shoals all the way along through to 50 Point, and then down towards Fruitland. And then after Fruitland, the shoreline kind of changes. It's more of a sandy bottom around the Hamilton Harbor area, and in the stretch here closer to Hamilton's pier. So you have a bit of a difference in some of the environments along here from a substrate standpoint. But really, what Mark is alluding to is, where is the most productive water? And from one year to the next, it could be quite a bit different based on not only how fast our spring starts to warm up, and how much runoff maybe of rainwater that we've been getting to warm up the shoreline, but it's also wind directions. Prevailing wind directions from from one way versus another could drastically affect the local fishery, where fish are being caught. Last year was extremely different from previous years, where we had a consistent. I mean, it was unfortunate that we didn't have an east wind every once in a while to be able to push the fish back into maybe further into the west, but instead we had constant and regular everyday west and southwest winds. The difficulty with that is it pushes away a lot of what could be warm water from the far west, the Hamilton, all the way through down into almost as much as Jordan. And it makes that water crystal clear and pushes away a lot of the warm water. Fortunately for those that are in the Niagara area, that west and southwest wind continue to push against the Niagara plume. The Niagara plume, fortunately, last year was warming up faster than Lake Ontario's water, which is typical. But we had some of those winds that would also only push the fish into that Niagara plume, the water coming out from the Niagara River. Some years when we have a very cold spring, maybe there's lots of ice on Lake Erie. Right now, I'm not sure that we're going to have ice on Erie at all. So we may have an earlier spring again. But what happens is if the Lake Erie is covered in ice, thick ice, and it takes a long time to melt off, the Niagara River will flow cold. And it becomes a deterrent. The fish don't want to go into the plume. They want to navigate more towards the west and find pockets of warm water along the shoreline, and then rely on any outflow from some of these point sources. So if we had a nice warm, perfect scenario for me in the month of April is after a good amount of rainfall out in the in the rural area out on the farm fields. And then after the rainstorm, the sun comes out and it's nice and warm, and it's warming up all of that runoff. The runoff is not only that colored water coming off of the fields, but it's also very warm, many degrees warmer than Lake Ontario's main water, or the water proper. So you're going to get that transition of not only colored water but extremely warm water from a point source, such as the outflows from creeks. Geographically, you know, we have a number of point sources along the way. So Hamilton Harbor, of course, we have right out of the canal. There's always a flow of water coming out because there's a number of tributaries that come into the Hamilton Harbor. So you have a plume of water that can come out here. You also have Stony Creek itself that comes out, and then 40 Mile Creek down through here, which is another big point source. Its headwaters are up on the Niagara Escarpment in the fields. So you get a nice plume of water that comes out of 40 Mile Creek after a nice rain. There's a little creek off of Beamsville, just to the east of Ontario Street. There's another one near Vineland, a small little coming off of right off of the end of Victoria Road. And then you have these big creeks, and probably the biggest attractors for those salmon at this time frame is from Jordan. The water coming out of Jordan Harbor, is 15 and 16 Mile Creek. So you get this whole embayment that seems to pool up some of that nice water coming out of these creeks. 12 Mile Creek, or Port Dalhousie, it also has a nice plume, but be cautious of that water as well as the canal water. Even though it is nice and it's a nice color, often it's not nearly as warm as some of these point sources in this time frame. Okay, so the water temperatures coming out of Lake Erie still has a great influence in both of these, because its water source of the most of its water source is from Lake Erie. So its water temperatures could be many degrees cooler than some of the tributaries that are coming in, such as Jordan Harbor and around Charles Daly Park, the two tributaries on either side. So that's kind of the differences. As we get through that cycle, you'll have fish that migrate up and down along our shoreline based on where that perfect water is set up. And from one day to the next could be completely different. And being agile, being ready to trailer your boat down to the next port, or travel quite a ways down along the shoreline in order to find warmer water and those pockets of more productive water is probably your best bet.
Yeah.
The last year, yeah, sorry.
No, I just want to say I couldn't agree more about for those, and I want to think that most of our group here is boats with 16 to 20 feet, very trailerable. Go where the good water is and where the fish are. Absolutely. Just because you have a launch pass at Fisherman's Pier, don't just launch there just because, and maybe you might catch a fish or two. If the fishing is good down Dalhousie way, come down to Dalhousie or Jordan. And the same can be said, for going the other way. Sometimes when we get some east winds, it can really set up the Bronte area. We'll talk about that, in early mid-May. Like fish where the productive water is, if you can. And no different than the summertime too. When the North Shore has its spurts of activity too. Make a day trip and experience the good fishing, and maybe learn some new waters at the same time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And one last thing that I wanted to talk about a little bit is this window of time that we're talking about is that later part of April, right? And this stretch from Weller Bay to the mouth of the Niagara River can also be very good. And it for me, it almost feels like it's a more stable water. I say that because the Niagara River, the current's coming out, you have this plume of water, and even on an east wind, it'll push that water from the Niagara River in this area. But on a west wind, it's also protected. So you have this kind of a pool of more, I don't know, more stable water, in my opinion. This past year was an example of that. This water from Weller to the Niagara Bar was the most productive during this window of time that we're talking about, later April through to even the next cycle of the first week or two of May.
Yeah.
All right, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, no, thanks. That was a great, breakdown of the shoreline there and all the different influences that can be had there. So let's we'll kind of break down what our setups are like for this time now when we're fishing typically in 15 to 30 feet of water. And again, there could be some overlap, or maybe we go back in shallower a bit, or maybe we slip out a little bit deeper. But generally, a typical 6-rod spread for me would be still with an outside board on each side, with monofilament line. And again, that monofilament line is generally 15 to 20 pound tests for me. But for those that maybe are limited in the the monofilament setups that they have, maybe they just have 25 or 30 pound that they run primarily through the summer. That's fine, and that's still good because that thicker line will keep your baits up high. Just again, splice in a 10-foot or so leader of 15 to 20 pound test mono, or fluorocarbon, I should say. And stick baits on those outer boards, and then we'll go back to those pictures there, Shane.
Yeah.
We're into the 4 and the 5-inch sizes now, because we are primarily targeting kings, but the larger browns will certainly go for those baits as well. And then the inside boards, depending on the day, maybe it's still a stick bait bite, but that's also when we'll start to use sections of maybe 2 and 3 color of lead core. And you can use those with shallow running stick baits. And we'll also start getting some spoons into the mix as well. The size of the spoons can vary. Still, I think at this time of the year, the fish are primarily feeding on the smelts. The alewives are just kind of starting to move in, but maybe not quite yet. It's more in the next segment where we see them, but it's still more of the longer, slender spoons, like the super slims and the stingers. But occasionally, we're into the regulars or the stingray sizes. You can run mags, but we're not quite into them yet, and that's also a speed thing as well. So here's a look at some of the spoons. On the picture on the right-hand side there, the Hog Wild right there in the center is a pretty popular one, especially when we're fishing, that pea green water. Off to the far left there, you can't really see it, but it's got chartreuse tape on the right side. That's kind of like a slapper pattern as well. It's a homemade one of mine. Or the second one from the right, that's one of the alewife patterns, I think, from Stinger. And then on the left-hand side, those are mag spoons, but still the colors are applicable. Wonder Bread is often a good color. And right there, the one to the left there, yep, that's it, Shane. That's a custom one from Dreamweaver. That's gold, I think it's Martel. And that's been a good color for me the last couple years. One thing to keep in mind too with your spoon selection is the colors of the blanks. Many of the standard ones are silver or chrome, but there are days when golds or coppers can be good, or even in low light conditions, the moonshines with the glow backs can also have their day too. And then we're into our 5th and 6th rods in the spread. And usually this is when we'll get into a medium-sized dipsy diver on braid line with a spoon. And then, maybe a downrigger then with a spoon stretched back. So, and there's a picture of the divers we were talking about earlier. In that first stage when we're fishing like 15, 20 feet of water, the divers there on the right-hand side, those those you can still stretch them out a ways and not hit bottom. It's not quite until we're fishing 30, 40 feet that I'm using the regular number 1 or 107 size, which that Fire Tiger one is there. But then, there are days when, the reason why I prefer using spoons when I can, like there are times in the year, when we're fishing that shallower water, stick baits are kind of a little more user friendly as far as keeping them up in the strike zone per se. But, I've always preferred to use spoons when I can because your landing percentage is a little better with just a single treble hook. And I just want to veer off just for a second. And you can see on some of the stick baits there, maybe Shane, you can just cycle back and forth slowly between the two. I've done some modifications to it. Maybe Shane, point at that Fruit Lips Reef Runner right there in the center, that or the Wonder Bread. As you can see, the front hook is taken off, and I've got a larger size treble hook on the back. And that's just to, in essence, then you're fishing your stick baits just like a spoon with just a single treble hook, and you're actually increasing your landing percentage by only having one hook, because then the fish doesn't have anywhere to gain leverage and trying to twist, and often they can break them because the stick baits, they're just not manufactured for salmon fish, and they obviously do catch them, but for the most part these baits are made for walleye and bass and pike fishing for the most part. So that's why I try to use spoons when I can, more often. Keep in mind though, when you are changing your hooks around, you want to make sure that your action is still productive, that they'll run properly at the correct speeds. And we're often running our stick baits, from 1.7 to about 2.2 for the most part, miles per hour. Generally, if you look at that bomber there at the bottom, that's and even the redfin just above that, that's a better. So I never use any of my stick baits with 3 hooks, even when I'm walleye fishing. I always take the front one off. I've always just find that to be a better way to go. But I'm constantly tweaking and playing with them until I see what's a better fit for each particular bait. Did you have anything to say on that, Shane, as far as crankbait tuning or modifications?
Yeah, be careful about how they track in the water. So you run them beside the boat first and pull them a little bit harder or a little bit faster than what you would troll, just to see that they're going to track properly. The last thing you want to do is send a body bait that is going to spin out, and it's out on a planer board and it catches the other line because you started to turn, you turn the boat and it's speeding up those lines, and it causes the body bait to spin out and catch the other line. It could really kind of put you, it could clear your lines, essentially, make a big mess. If there's any form of frustration, I probably would say that would be it. Make sure that your body baits are tuned properly. And what it means is, just like I said, pull it along beside the boat a little bit faster than what you're trolling. So you're going to pull the bait faster to see if it spins out. If it does, then the eye needs to be bent just ever so slightly. I can't say enough about how delicate you need to be with it. And more often than not, you're going to excessively bend it too much and it's going to spin out the other way. So, you're going to have to tune it to the point where it's going to dig. And even when you pull it hard, it won't spin out. Some baits are better than others out of the package. I'm not going to talk about that so much, but nonetheless, all baits need to be looked at first before you run them. Just make sure that you have them running properly before you put those lines out, because man, oh man, it could be quite a headache if you didn't. And that also includes after you caught a fish or two, especially if you're tangling with a big king on, and it's it's really given some grief. You're going to have to put that bait back in the water and just check make sure that it's tracking properly before you send it back out again.
Yeah. On that point too, just mention Offshore, the company that makes planer boards and other accessories. They actually have a crankbait tuner tool, and we do have them at the store, and they do work a little better than just a pair of needle nose pliers as far as very carefully tweaking that eye. Something to check out. All right, we had a couple comments in the chat section, but we have a question here. Is there an advantage to running single hooks on spoons? Many people do believe that your landing percentage is likely higher with a single side wash spoon. I personally don't go out of my way to make the change. I just like to play the odds as far as with having 3 points in the water as opposed to one. Often, as you can see there on the Evil Eyes, many of them, I believe, do come stock with a single hook because they're such a light spoon. You need the side wash hook to facilitate the proper action. And there is some discussion I've seen on some of the various chat forums over the years, especially Ernie Lantine, a very successful angler from the far eastern side out by Oswego. He's very fanatical about tuning those light spoons. He is a brown trout catching machine, and he uses a lot of those older spoons out there. And he speaks a lot in some articles about tuning spoons like that.
Yeah, exactly. For those that are interested in tuning a spoon, typically it's the slower that you want that bait to go, the more of an S bend you'll see in the body of that spoon. The flatter it is, tends to work better at faster speeds. So if you think about it, some of the fastest spoons that you can run would be, well, for those that remember the Nasty Boy spoons, very thin, very, very straight. Okay, those were really good at running very, very fast speeds. Meanwhile, the Evil Eye, very wide spoon, has a big cup on the back, the tail end or the hook end of the spoon, and it often bends out to the opposite way of the bend in the cupped side on a line tie. So it makes more of an S bend. And that S bend is really kind of the essence of running nicely at very slow speeds. And it's probably the reason why it is one of the better spoons for brown trout, is those old Evil Eyes.
Mm-hmm. And just before we kind of transition to the next period, for any of you that may be watching now or later, when you have limited gear, maybe you're more of a Lake Erie angler, and you don't have all the heavier equipment or even downriggers. This is a fantastic time of the year, fishing that 15 to 30, 40 foot water to get into the salmon and trout action using your walleye gear. You can use your walleye crankbaits again if you just modify your hooks accordingly. And even if you just have braid setups, you don't even have any lead core. Again, you can just run some shallow divers. If you have jet divers, you can run jet divers and spoons, and or just splice in some mono into your braid line, and you can use snap weights. There's many different ways, because you don't need to get your baits down very deep. You just 15 to 20 feet below the surface. You sometimes even higher is all you really need to accomplish for this time period. So, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them, or later, you can link up with Shane and I through our social media channels as well. So then moving on now, this gets us to kind of into more what I really prefer, like late April and early May for the most part. When the water is warming up now, we're seeing a lot more, maybe consistent 45 degrees or so on the surface, and we're 30 to 50 feet of water. Often still fishing along that shoreline for the most part. Maybe Weller now, that water is warming up a bit more by the canal. And I really like it because it's mostly a spoon bite, at least for me, and that's what I'll often put out mostly. we're fishing a little bit deeper. We can run just a touch faster, 2.2 to 2.4 miles an hour many days. And we're running a lot more of the regular, and we're getting into the mag sizes now because we're seeing more alewives coming inshore. This is also a time of year. I know many people who like keeping their yards looking nice despise dandelions, but I generally love seeing dandelions because that's usually when the king salmon fish. That's just my little nature indicator, so you can kind of keep that tucked away. So yeah, it's mostly a spoon bite. We're getting into the regular size divers now, and fishing generally 2 riggers, and we're running slightly longer lead cores now, 3 to 5 colors for the most part when we're, in 30 to 50 feet of water. If you have wire setups, you can run wire. You don't need to, if you have both braid and wire. I'll still typically run my braid because I prefer to keep things up higher. That's just the way that I do it. There's still some brown trout as well. It's usually around this time of year where some of the bigger browns are getting caught. I remember last year was early May. There was on the same Saturday, there was a pair of 20-pound browns caught. One was entered in the Derby and the other wasn't because the other guy didn't have a ticket. But there's, and Lakers are showing up all over the place. They're actually, at this point, Lakers become a nuisance for most of us that are targeting the salmon. And we're even seeing some cohos in the mix too, a little bit at this point. We're not quite at the peak yet for the coho, but we are seeing more of them showing up as well. Anything to share on this time period, Shane?
It's also fun. That latter part of April, getting into early May, and starting to see the king show up really well, and the dribs and drabs of those cohos coming in. It's really, it's the bread and butter of our spring fishing. And from looking at it from a lake's perspective, the full lake's perspective, we're very fortunate in Niagara that we get these fish at that time of the year. Most other places around the lake do not, at least in the Ontario waters. So we're very fortunate. It's nice to be able to capitalize something like that, very close to home, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're and even occasionally to another bait there that's we've been doing fairly well with. Actually, just go back one more, Shane.
Yep.
Is the middle one there, that the Freedom cut bait herring bait. It's kind of a hybrid bait. Like it's kind of like a spoon, but it's got a built-in curve to it that it produces a wider action to emulate the roll of a cut bait, or like a herring rig. And I've done well fishing them behind the flasher, but I've done a little better more often just fishing it clean like a spoon, either behind a downrigger or on a lead core line. And then we can slide to that other one where we were, Shane, with the Limans there. Limans and J plugs, and Dreamweaver has plugs. Salmon Candy has plugs. Generally, I'll start running 1 or 2 in the mix. I do quite well with them first thing in the morning or in the evening. They're a pretty aggressive bait, and they do generate some fish. I don't generally load up my spread with them, but it's always nice to have 1, maybe 2 out at a time, depending on the day. Usually either tight to a rigger in the morning or off a diver or on a lead core. It kind of just depends on what's happening on a given day. And and we'll use those plugs all throughout the season, and then they come back real strong again in the fall for stagers. And then as well, there on the left, we've got some baits. Once we start seeing some coho showing up, the mini Dodgers and flashers there, generally orange and red and chartreuse patterns are pretty good. And then the flies, hammer or green crinkle or aqua. That's a hog wild fly on the red flasher there that I had some success with last year. And then for spoons, anything that's got a lot of orange, red, and chartreuse and just colors like that. You can see on the middle one there, I modified it. I put some orange tape on there. We call those hot backs. Those can also be pretty productive too. It took me a few years, almost 10 years ago, to believe in those mini flasher setups. I know we read a lot about how they're productive on Lake Michigan for many guys down there, and I eventually caught on them, and I caught a lot of cohos, and we get steelhead on them too. They do work very well when the fish are around. Yeah, I think if you have nothing else to share, Shane, then we'll kind of move into the kind of what we'll call the final segment of the spring. And that's, this is kind of when that Lake Erie water is warming up, as Shane was talking about. And we're focusing not primarily, but more around the deeper water, and particularly the Niagara bar drop off. Shane, do you want to bring up that graphic there, and maybe you can just kind of go over the geography just for a minute?
Yeah, for sure. So the structure that Mark has mentioned, it's coined as the Niagara bar, and it's really a shallow area. So you see the shallow area; it tops out to around 9 or 8 feet in some areas. This is many miles offshore, and you can get into that kind of shallow water. Many people confuse the Niagara bar to the area that you see most often, where the guys are drifting for lake trout and catching the fish in close to the mouth of the river. And that's this stretch here. Okay, so there's the border, and predominantly they're drifting on the New York side going up, and the green can is here. You see the green can. This is right at the mouth of the river. So this is the Niagara bar, don't get me wrong. But the outer bar, or the larger piece of structure that Mark was talking about, is this big gigantic bar, and it extends 9 miles out. It's quite large. It's such a massive structure. It's actually one of the largest underwater structure we have in Lake Ontario. And couple that with the water coming out of the Niagara River, it could be quite a magnet for fish. One of the major stopover areas. So you can see that, a lot of the contours from the shallow water, and this bench of area that is usually from that 30 out to about 80 feet of water. It's a nice living area for that first couple weeks of May. So those salmon coming out of the depths of the main lake will often come up on the Niagara bar if the plume is getting warmer than Lake Ontario's main water. They'll come right up on this shelf, and then they'll forage throughout this stretch. But as the water temperatures start to climb, and you start to see bait coming out of the river, especially the smelt and arriving alewife, you'll start to see those fish that are dropping off. And I'm sorry, the navionics chart isn't the greatest here, but they'll start to drop off the ledge of the bar into that deeper water. And we'll start catching those fish. It could be as close to the surface, all the way down to 200 plus feet of water. Yes, we catch them very deep this time of year. And generally, I mean, from a temperature standpoint, from top to bottom, there's very little difference. You're talking 44 degrees, 42 degrees, all the way down, because that Niagara plume that's coming out over top of the bar and flushing down into the abyss off the edge of the bar. It generally mixes in a nicer, warmer water than the main lake that could be as little as 41 degrees. So that area seems to attract a lot of fish. We're at 54 participants, Mark.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
No, that's a great explanation there of the bar there, Shane. And and in typical years, when I know things are a little cloudy now as far as fishing on the New York side, whether you technically can or can't, we're not going to go there right now. But on other years when it's not a question, it's very advantageous to have a New York license. So it's not uncommon to just get pushed over there, even if you don't intend to, by all the boat traffic, because sometimes you have to do a wide circle around boats to reset your pass and whatnot, or just sometimes sometimes the better water gets blown over there, and that's where the fishing is. It can be a mile or two, or maybe sometimes a few miles to the east there. So definitely recommend getting a New York license if you're going to spend a bit of time out that way.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's a nice picture there.
Yeah, often your screen will look like this off the Niagara bar. Okay, so you'll have this deep, deep bait that seems to come through. It's sometimes the smelt that has come out of the Niagara River, their post-spawn smelt, and they're grouped up out there. It could also be the arrival of the adult alewife, and then they will start to come out from the depths and get ready to come in to spawn. And that's generally where the salmon are intercepting them, is right along the Niagara bar, right on the ledge. So even though I'm reading 150, sometimes if you're not watching and the boat is turned towards the bar, the depth climbs very quickly. So you got to be kind of on your game. Not only are you watching the depth, but you're also watching fellow boats. Everyone is fishing along the ledge. Tends to be, everyone follows along in a line, and you want to be cognizant of others that are around you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe just a good time just to maybe just a little note to even in the springtime it can be the same. Maybe there's a tight band of green water in the shallow water there, 20-30 feet, and you always want to be respectful of the fellow boaters, especially if they're fighting a fish on. Yeah, you probably want to get in there where the productive water is, but just put yourself in their shoes. Just give them some space so they can still navigate and land their fish as well. And fish in the bar is no different than fish in the drop off, and out front of Toronto in July too, as far as the way that the geography is and the boat traffic too. So we're all trying to do the same thing. So. Also be mindful too of your planer boards and your long lines too when you're in boat traffic like that too. When there's a lot of traffic like that, maybe you should be careful about setting out long lead cores or coppers. Maybe not until you're far away from the boat. So generally, fishing with a spread of downriggers and divers. So typically a 6-rod spread for me when I'm fishing the bar and it's heavy boat traffic, it will be 2 downriggers and 2 dipsy divers on each side. Typically a wire diver on each side, like maybe a mag diver. There's a good illustration there. Yeah. Your mag divers on wire are fishing inside and deeper, generally like on a 1 or 1.5 setting. And then you can have your braid divers out on a 3 or a 3.5 setting pie. Maybe I'll run typically spoons on the braid divers up higher, and then flasher flies or maybe a meat rig on the other diver. And then on the riggers, it kind of depends what's going on. Maybe it'll be a meat rig down deep and a spoon on the other one, or a flasher fly. It depends on the day, but that's generally what a 6-rod spread for me will look like. And we're as far as the spoon selection goes, it's exclusively mags for the most part at this time, unless I'm having a rod out maybe targeting coho. But definitely like mag Dreamweavers and moonshines and Michigan Stinger mags as well. Anything to share on the we're going to talk more when we get into the summer seminar, our next one. We're going to get into a little bit more detail about flasher flies and meat rig setups. So we will welcome questions about it if anybody has any, but we're just kind of starting to use them at this point in the season in mid-late May. But obviously they become a big part of our spread in the summer. And I see Shane's got a graphic there. He's showing a bunch of different what we call down speed and temp units. We've got the Fish Hawk, There's the depth rater, there's the sub troll, and there's even been a newer one on the market these days called the smart troll as well. But they can be very crucial and nice to have when you're fishing down deeper, with all the currents at play, to make sure that your stuff is running right. Maybe Shane, if you want to talk about those units.
Yeah, it can for sure. The down speed, especially on the Niagara bar. So again, we have a lot of water coming out from the Niagara River, lots of current. So what is happening on the surface versus what is happening down, where your baits are, especially if you're fishing deep, could be significantly different. I've seen it as much as 2 miles an hour difference. So if you're relying strictly on GPS, you could really be spinning your baits out very, very quickly, or they're dead in the water and you're just basically looking like, nothing's happening, no action at all. So knowing what's the speed down at the ball is really critical. I would say if you're fishing the Niagara bar, especially, it's very, very critical in catching fish. And so that, as Mark had mentioned, there's different versions of different products that you could use to get your speed. I use a fish hawk. I like the fish hawk, but I've also used the depth rater and the sub troll in the past. Whatever it is that you use, just be comfortable with the numbers that you see and how you fish and what is productive to you, because your unit could be completely different from somebody else's unit. I noticed in the comments there's someone said or asked a question of what speeds do you recommend? Absolutely love to give you ballpark figures of, we talked early in the month of April, we're using speeds of around 1.7 to 2.2 miles per hour. And now we're getting into May and we're starting to bump up the speed just ever so slightly. So typically at this time of the year, and depends on what kind of baits we're running, we could be running as low as 2 miles an hour or 2.0, or as high as 2.9. It's uncommon for us to run that fast, and it's uncommon for us to run 1.7 at this time of the year. But it largely has to do with the baits that you're running and what you want them to perform at. So cut bait, for an example, works very well at around that 1.9 to 2. I hope
Sorry,
I'm not
Shane.
muted. No problem. So you generally want to, fish the baits that you're using at the speed that they're optimized at. Cut bait, like I said, is usually around that 2.0 miles per hour. You get into flasher and fly, for an example, which is this time frame. We're starting to introduce flasher and flies. Is usually around that 2.4 miles per hour, 2.2 at the lower end, and 2.7 at the high end. These are all numbers that I consider on my fish hawk. But what numbers you use, if you use, let's say, a depth rater or a sub troll, those numbers could be significantly different. So everyone's own unit that you're using to record your down speed could be different, and just be cognizant of that. Even if you're talking to somebody else and they ask you, what speed are you going? Well, on my fish hawk, I'm doing 2.2 miles per hour. But you know what? I'm going northeast and my speed on my GPS is 2.5. That might be more useful for your fellow angler that's fishing right beside you, is say, okay, that's what I'm doing. That's what my down speed is right now when I'm doing that speed on GPS. So how do I differentiate between the two and use that down speed on my own unit to make a successful day?
Mm-hmm.
Mark?
Yeah, no, good points. And, I think for those that don't have those units on their boat, you certainly still can catch fish all throughout the year. a good way to gauge your speed is, have a good working compass with you, and and watch, as Shane said, your GPS speed, and then you can kind of replicate what you find to be successful for you. If you're going 2.5 miles per hour on a north heading, and you're catching fish, um, take note too of how your cable is coming off your downriggers, if you're using downriggers, or off your how your diver rods are pulling in the water, and you'll be able to replicate what is a productive trolling pass for you on a given day, just by using a compass and in your GPS speed. It's all about successfully repetibility, and we use the same things too, with our line counter reels, when we're fishing our stick baits. We may not be getting bit when we have 70 feet of line out, but if we have 110 feet of line out, then that's getting them into the zone. So, but there's other factors too, your line and everything, but.
Yeah, I was just going to say that on this graphic, it kind of helps a little bit to identify that in this time frame we're fishing a little bit deeper. If it was in this red zone where we're running spoons at high speeds, these are the kinds of baits that it caters best to. Meanwhile, on the right-hand side, in this yellow range, you're talking about a bit of slower speed, more of your cut bait. And that's the kind of range. So you got the mag spoons that run at this type of speed within this range. So if you categorize your baits based on speed, what they optimize at, it kind of helps you to when you get a bite at a particular speed on a particular bait, what can I match it up with? You may not find that you're running a small thin spoon, that like a nasty boy. You may not run a nasty boy while you're running cut bait. They just, the nasty boy is good at very fast speeds. Probably not so good when you're trolling slow with cut bait, and that's your more productive rods. So it just, you're matching your baits to the speeds that you're trying to target.
Yep. That's good. Maybe now we'll talk about setups, and then I see we've had a couple other questions trickle in, and we will get to those, but we'll just kind of finish up what's on the agenda here. Then we'll have lots of time for some Q&A and some discussion too. Shane, you want to kind of share what you like to use for planer board rods, when we're fishing the crankbaits, maybe, that can be dual purpose, maybe if guys are walleye fishing on Lake Erie and then on Lake Ontario?
Yeah, in the early spring, I really like what I would normally run for walleye. I like using them as well for the browns and early kings. So it's generally with lighter line, especially for the browns, fishing the 12-pound test kind of stuff, and it usually works really well for those browns. So they essentially double for both my walleye rods as well as my my brown trout rods. Later in the spring, I'll start to cater more to more stout rods and likely higher pound tests primarily. So as I get into that salmon bite, we talked about brown trout being 12-pound test mono. I'll be up, I'll be bringing out my salmon trolling rods for the spring, which would tend to be about 17-pound test. And then as the season goes on a little bit further into May, where we're starting to use more of the mag spoons and maybe some of the plugs as well, I'll be running 20-pound test mono. The cut bait, when I'm running cut bait and big flashers, flasher flies, the sky's the limit as far as for me using pound test. I generally like to load up my reels with a heavy pound test, usually 40-pound test, because there's no stealth needed. There's no finesse needed when you're talking about trolling with a flasher and fly. So I generally like to use pound test that again matches the equipment that you're running. The worst thing that I could see is running 30-pound test and trying to run a small spoon. You're just killing the action. It's just not going to get what you want out of that spoon. Meanwhile, your 30-pound test is a nice all-around flasher fly and potentially flasher cut bait setup, and you could get away with it then during the middle of the summer.
Mhm.
Actions for rods. I like the medium light type of actions first thing in the spring for the browns. Go to medium action for salmon as you get along into the latter part of spring, and then going into your more heavier sets. I like the medium heavies when it comes to cut bait and flasher flies on my riggers.
Mhm.
With a high-speed reel. Okuma makes those high-speed reels 6.2 to 1. Awesome for those deep sets in May when you're trying to catch up on your line. You just, you're starting to crank in a lot of that slack line that comes in really fast.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm a big fan of those high speeds as well for the downriggers. Yeah, diver rods were generally 9.5 feet. A medium action one can dual purpose, I'd say, for both walleye and some Lake Ontario. But if you're primarily on Lake Ontario, then you're probably best to be with a medium heavy, and with a 30 size Okuma or equivalent reel, that mid-size reel. I prefer 50-pound braid for my Lake Ontario stuff. I've actually, last year I made a switch. I went to 65-pound, but that was intentional because, as I said before, the way I fish my braid divers, I like them to be up high. So I kind of welcome the thicker line, and then I use my wire when I'm trying to accomplish getting down deeper myself. I know for those who fish mostly Lake Erie, they'll generally be 30 or 40-pound test for their braid. 30 can work on Lake Ontario. I think it's a little on the light side. 40 is often what we suggest if you're dual purposing between the lakes. Yeah, and for lead core, an 8.5 foot medium downrigger rod will generally work. There are some lead core specific rods out there. They don't have to have the stainless eyes. The stainless eyes on the rods are more suited for copper or weighted steel line, but they will work for lead core. There's no doubt about it. Okuma did, I think Daiwa now also has rods that have a larger eye, but they're ceramic, and that's just to facilitate the connecting knots so that it flows nicely when you're letting it out off your reel. Shane, can you just bring up that picture of the planer boards, please?
Oh, yes. Maybe before we do that, I wanted to point your attention to as well. I wrote a blog of some of the rods and reel combinations and in different scenarios that I like best. I put that in my blog. So if you go to fantasticsportfishing.com, and on the main page, you'll see blog at the top right-hand corner. You can search up rods, for an example, as a search word, and it'll come up to this blog that I've put in. And it kind of described for me, what my preferences of rods and reels that I like to use in that particular scenario. And it'll show you some of the graphics of why the actions I prefer in that different setups. So if you want to refer to that, that might be of use to you. And it also includes, serial numbers too. So you can go into Mark and say, hey, I really like to take a look at this rod here. Do you have it in stock?
Yeah, well, that's great. Thank you, Shane.
Okay, so back to
the planer boards.
Yes, planer boards. Let's get to there. Okay, here we go. There we go.
All right, so we've got three different size boards there. For those that maybe are looking for their first set of planer boards and you're wanting a set that can do a little bit of everything throughout the season on both lakes, I would tend to suggest one that's like in the middle there. That particular one is Dreamweaver's Ninja board in their walleye size. And there's other brands out there too that make boards in that size. Church has their walleye board. Offshore has their version. Opti has a board as well. So anything in that mid size will accommodate crankbaits or fishing sections of lead core up to 10 colors. A good all-around board. I've really come to like the Dreamweaver ones myself the last couple of years. That push button there, that red button you see on the top there, that releases the line from the arm and as well from the rear pin at the same time. There's a mechanism that opens them both at once. And I like that the clip on the arm, it faces inward, so it just naturally pulls and grips, as opposed to some of the other brands that have theirs facing outward. But all the boards they run quite well the same. If you do have maybe you've been fishing the lake for a while and you do have a set of mid-sized boards, and if you're starting to run some longer lead cores or heavier copper lines, and the one at the top, that's their full-size Ninja board. Church and Offshore have large ones like that as well, that'll make pulling out the heavier line a lot easier. And then on the bottom is Church's version. They've got a mini one, and I believe Offshore does as well. And I've really come to like those when we're fishing those little stick baits in that 15-foot or less water in the spring. It also makes it quite enjoyable, when you're fighting the browns on light tackle, and then you're not pulling in a heavier board as well. And I do use those mini boards as well when we're fishing early in the season on Lake Erie. In 10 to 25 feet of water in that early season, we're fishing the points and the reefs and the shoals. So just something to consider. There's, all the brands make really good planer boards out there, and they all have 2 or 3 sizes in their lineup for different situations. No different than divers as well. So there's a size diver for each application as well. The question will probably come up if it hasn't yet already. I haven't looked yet, but on the topic of snubbers or no snubbers with divers, there's always a popular debate. I've come to not using snubbers as often as I can. I generally don't now when I'm fishing with flashers and flies, because I'm using generally 40 or 50 pound test monofilament as my leader from my diver to my flasher. And I feel with a properly set drag on my reel and the stretch that you get from that mono, that it accommodates the impact from a solid salmon hit. The only time I still do use snubbers occasionally is when I'm fishing spoons on lighter line, like with 20 or 25 pound test to get the action right for my spoons. And I will use a snubber just to kind of accommodate that lighter line. But that's kind of my personal view on snubbers. Where do you sit with that, Shane?
I generally like using snubbers when I'm running spoons. So because my leader is lighter, usually a 20-pound test fluorocarbon leader behind the diver, I like to use a snubber in that situation. For flasher and fly, I don't normally run a snubber. The exception of that might be when I'm fishing Stager Kings, and we're not talking about that here today, but with Stager Kings, you have a shorter amount of line out to your flasher fly with less stress, less stretch, excuse me. So that snubber does provide a bit of a shock absorber for those big kings when they crash the bait in late August. But yeah, I don't necessarily buy into the snubbers. I not ever use snubbers when I'm walleye fishing. Seems a bit over the top or excessive, not really necessary. And that includes when I was fishing in the central basin of Lake Erie. Snubbers, you get into rainbows and stuff like that as well out there, and you're trolling very fast, excess of 3 miles an hour. But even still, I don't use snubbers in that situation, primarily because they're walleye and they're just not as strong. So yeah, I like snubbers only pretty much when it's talking about running them for spoons behind your divers.
Hmm. Yep, good point. How about another little fun debate here? Big boards versus inline boards. So like a mass setup versus the inlines.
For me,
Yeah,
I
what's your take?
yeah, I like both. You're probably I gotta sit on the fence on this one. I
Mhm.
love big boards and I love small boards, but there's a bit of a difference between the two. And I'm trying to find my oh, just hold one sec while I'm trying to locate my
Sure.
presentation for this. But I do like the big boards for this for the instance of um, being able to replicate what it is that you're catching fish. Here, I think I got the presentation that I wanted. Um, so if, for an example, you're really dialed in on a particular type of setup, okay? Um, so you have So generally what they suggest is when you use big boards, you want to stagger your lines. Okay. So your outside lines are usually highest in the water column and the furthest out away from the boat. Meanwhile, your inside line is shorter and tends to be a little bit deeper. This is for the ease of catching fish and not tangling lines. And 99% of the people that start off with planer boards, that is their most how would you say their biggest thing to overcome is
Mm.
that feeling of crossing lines and causing a bit of a headache when you're bringing fish in. However, once you've become more comfortable with it, you'll start to realize that, yeah, those circumstances, they do happen, especially with salmon. But more often than not, if you're running lines that are very similar in length and very similar in depth, you can get away with, slight variations. So I love my big boards like this when I know that I'm going to dial in on one side of the boat targeting one depth range with the same type of setup. And what I mean by that is, let's say in this, early May timeframe, and we're catching a lot of fish on 5 to 7 color lead cores. Okay, so what I might do is I'll run a 5 and a 6 on one side and a 7 and 8 on the other side. And there's very little differences between the two. So when you catch a fish on, let's say, the outside board rod, you have to let that inside board line go down towards the board, right? So they're becoming swapped. So this whole idea of staggering your lines like you see in the graphic here, especially with that number 1 that you see in this graphic, that no longer becomes the case. But because it's only one and so that's the essence of the big boards. I really like using those for the efficiency of getting similar type lines, same depth off the big boards. And as soon as a fish takes it, they rip it out, and you're not battling an inline planer board, which is great for big salmon. It's more difficult when you're trying to bring in a big king on an inline planer board. Um, the big boards, the pitfall to that is when the fish pulls it out of the release clip, it often provides slack line for a short little bit before the fish finally tightens up the line and you start to see the rod buckle over. We've come to working against that a little bit in our favor by using elastics. So on the main line, we would half hitch the elastic where it's going to go into the release clip. And the elastic allows it to hold in the release clip a little bit longer and bend over that rod a little bit more while the fish is putting pressure on. And instead of flicking the line to come out of the release clip when you have a fish that's on and they haven't pulled it out of the release clip. All we do is we start winding until that elastic breaks. And now you don't have any slack line left. So you can fight that fish without losing the fish because of that instance of slack line. Of course, inline planer boards don't have that issue. It's generally always going to have some form of pressure against that fish and keeping the line taut. And that's really good for walleye. And I also like my inline planer boards when it comes to brown trout fishing. Very similar situation as the walleye fishing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's generally what I like to use is those big boards for the big kings on when you're really dialed in. I wanted to also make mention too as well. A lot of times, it's something that's a bit of an oversight too. Is people often when they're fishing shallow, especially in the spring, and they say, "I'm not marking anything. Should I be fishing here?" This graphic kind of illustrates that fact that really what your sonar is reading is a very small swath of water underneath your boat. And it doesn't really give you a good feel about what's happening out towards your planer boards. So that's really kind of key because, you could mark the odd fish, but there's a whole lot more fish out to the side that you don't see on your graph. And especially if those fish sense you coming, they'll spook out to the side and out to where your planer boards are.
Yeah. So just on the note too about using inline boards here, I see our buddy here, Vlad, chime in. I was going to get to this. There are different ways that you can modify and trick out your inline planer boards. There's different aftermarket releases and different ways to set them up. One way is you can put a Sam's probe release on where the arm is on the planer board, and then so the idea is that'll pop off like a kind of like a Black's downrigger release, and then you'll still have your planer board dangling on a red OR18 clip off the back, and you will have less resistance in the water. I have used that technique a little bit, and it's you kind of got to get that pin and that setting set just right for it to work. But that is a productive way for rigging up planer boards. So we at the store we do have various different clips that you can modify them with. There's countless videos and discussions on different websites about how to do it. It's in the end, it's whatever works best for you and you're comfortable with. But thanks, Vlad, for pointing that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Inline planer boards, not unlike when you're running the big boards. When you set the furthest, so the line that's furthest away from the boat, whether it be on an inline planer board or out on a big double ski mast board, they will be the furthest out and the closest to the bow in your rod holders. Meanwhile, every board line that comes in closer to the boat will be a little bit closer to the stern of the boat set up. So that what happens is that inside line, when it gets taken, it's not going to cross over the other rod. So your lines will always be free. So that's a really good point to make mention. The third type of board is actually a stern board, a stern planer. These have become quite popular over the past couple of years. This one is a church tackle stern planer, and there's different versions of this. I actually just paint a Gatorade bottle and put an OR18 release clip, a red release clip with the pin on it. So that's all I need to run a shoot rod on a stern planer. The benefit of a stern planer is that, let's say for an example, you have a shallow set of let's say a 3-color lead core, and you're fishing cohos with it, but you're still fishing deep on all the rest of the rods, whether you be diver rods or rigger rods. That stern planer will allow you to get that line out behind the boat quite a distance away and utilize just those 2 or 3 colors of lead core without it sinking too far. So it's still running close to the surface. The stern planer keeps it up high. And if you hook a big king on one of your rods, whether your diver rods or your rigger rods, and you're fighting that fish in and around the back of the boat, that stern planer is keeping that short bit of line well away from the boat, way back behind the boat. And that seems to really help a lot of, those tangles that could potentially happen when you have a shoot rod in the mix while fishing for kings.
Yeah. Okay. Good point. Yeah, no, I don't typically like using a lot of stuff out to shoot if I don't have to, but using one of those stern planers sure makes it manageable, and it gives you a good visual of where that line is, so you can fish around it if you get a bit of activity at the back of the boat there. We're kind of near the end of at least what I had for an agenda, but I know we've got a few questions in the chat box here that we may have missed. So we're going to check here. I'm going to see the first one I think we missed is I only have 2 rods with lead core that I use for walleye, and they are 18-pound test lead core. Will they be okay for salmon? Yeah, no, they certainly will be. I don't use the 18-pound test. I know it does sink a little bit better than the 27 does. The 27 is the most common one, but you definitely are okay to use the 18-pound lead core. What I would be concerned about is just what you have for a leader. I would probably have at least 15, but preferably 20, maybe 25-pound test for the fluorocarbon leader coming off the lead core. But no, 18-pound test will certainly work if you're a walleye angler and you want to stay set with that. The next one we have here is some spoons have split rings and others don't. And any reason? Well, every brand is different, I suppose. And I just fish them myself however they come. I don't remove a split ring off a spoon or add one on. On that note, what I will say is for those that may have been looking carefully at my stick baits, you'll see that there are no split rings on the noses of mine. I intentionally remove those because I always fasten, I use a large dual lock clip. I don't use a snap swivel for when I'm fishing stick baits. I use a clip on it, and I feel I get a good action with that dual lock clip, and I don't need to have that ring there. It's just it's a thing that I've always had in my mind that ring could possibly be a weak point. So I just eliminate them all from my stick baits. But that's just a personal thing that I do. It's not something I'm made. Yep, right there is the dual lock to the left of that chain swivel there. So, but that's just a little personal thing that I do.
Yeah, just to add to that as well, Mark. The shape of the snap or the snap swivel for me is really important as well. I don't like one that becomes pointy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So for an example, that cross lock that we were just talking about, it has a nice wide loop. And that allows for a greater amount of freedom with the bait to be able to move along in that, instead of it being pinched down into a sharp bend in your snap. So also be cognizant of the size of the snaps and the snap swivels. So oversized snaps could dampen the action of, let's say, a body bait, for an example, or a small spoon. So you want to potentially size down your snap swivel so that it is more in line with the type of bait that you're running. Larger size snap swivels tend to dampen the bait's action at times.
Yeah, definitely. You don't want to cheap out on terminal tackle. It is, obviously, getting set up, it's an investment, with the baits and rods, reels, and everything else, and outfitting your boat. But don't pick the bargain brand snap swivels. pick there. Many brands are good, but make sure it's, a ball bearing and good quality snap swivel for sure, or it could break your heart down the road.
Yes.
Just scrolling back here. Rob had a question. He said, for early May fishing, are the salmon more likely closer to Grimsby than St. Catharines or Niagara on the lake? Sorry if I already mentioned, if you mentioned this, he joined late. So yeah, Rob, we did touch on that. So, we are recording this and you can go back and watch this later off YouTube. But we did say that, the location of the fish and the time frame, it all varies on the water temperature and the water color and where the winds are pushing it at any given time. So yeah, we did cover that in depth a little bit there. We got one here. When using Dreamweaver divers, the depth chart is for braided line. And I think he's kind of asking what's the difference between the braid and the wire line. We actually have the books in the store. We have like a master copy behind the counter that we're happy to share the info for. Years ago, offshore precision trolling did many tests, and they still are constantly testing new stuff. The depth curves, different lures and different types of line. So there are charts available that compare all, a dipsy diver or a deeper diver and braid line and wire line. But yeah, wire line will get down. I forget what the percentage is. It might be 20 or 30% deeper than braid line. They have an app now. They stopped making the books years ago, but you can subscribe to their app, and that'll give you full access to all of the information there. Anything to add on that, Shane? The diver, the braid versus wire difference?
Yeah. So I think that the wire line will get a little bit deeper. It's negligible, but at the same time, it has different advantages. So if the question is kind of two-part, it could be that you already have braid and you want to incorporate it into your larger diver setups. You certainly can. There's no doubt about it. Will it be as effective as wire line is on a day-to-day basis? I'm gonna say probably no. For me, I really do lean a lot on wire line for my divers. I do find that they are, they generally outproduce braid. And in the early days when we first started with wire, it was where we had braid on one side of the boat and wire on the other to test it out, to see which one was going to produce from one day to the next. And over time, it was for salmon and trout, especially, was certainly a favoritism towards wire. And I think that has kind of proved it to me enough to say that if I'm going to be running two diver rods for salmon and trout, they're almost, well, more often than not, they're going to be two wire diver rods, if not one wire diver rod and then experiment on the other one.
Yeah, especially when we're fishing, when we get outside of 50 feet of water, for sure.
Yes.
And then in the summer too, they repel the fleas much better than braid does. But we'll talk about that more in the next one. And just a little clarification for those that are maybe newer and they're wondering kind of what kind of wired we're talking about, because there can be different terminology used for different types of line. The wire we're talking about right now using for divers is generally a 7-strand wire. That would be 30-pound test. I think Shane's looking for a graphic to demonstrate that. There's no.
Oh no, I don't have it there. Sorry.
But you can leave it on there, Shane.
Yeah.
Because we'll get to that. Because there is, another type of line that can be classified. That sometimes gets called wire, and that's weighted steel. And that is different. Weighted steel and copper, we've got that there in that bottom right, the atomic copper, that is a sinking line, and it's very similar to lead core, and we fish those off planer boards. So sinking lines like copper or weighted steel and lead core, those are fished off the planer boards. And what we call wire is 7-strand braided wire that is generally 30-pound test, and that's used for our dipsy divers. But we'll speak a little bit more to that in the next one. Rob's asking, when fishing stick baits early in the spring, does size matter? And then, so we'll answer that. I think early in the spring, and like those first couple weeks, at late March or early April, I tend to use more 3-inch size baits, because and that's mostly to kind of match the size of the forage that they're feeding on, which is primarily gobies, emerald shiners, and the odd smelt in early. And that's what I've kind of be successful with. I know some guys will use, regular size baits like bombers and, the yallies and that, and redfins too, and they'll do well. But I generally stick with the smaller ones when I'm targeting browns for those first couple weeks. Maybe, if I'm running 4 rods, maybe 3 will have the smaller baits out. Maybe I'll throw 1 larger bait out just for something different, trying to establish a pattern. And we had another question here. When using stick baits in the early spring, are you running divers with these or just running the stick baits on their own? So yeah, we did touch on that, but just to refresh, generally we're running the stick baits on their own in the shallower water, 20 feet or less, just on mono, because you want to keep those baits, they only need to get down 5 to 10 feet for the most part, because that's where the zone where the fish are actively feeding. It's not until maybe when we're in 25, 30 feet of water that maybe we'll use some short lead core, or you can even use snap weights. If you don't have lead core, you can use snap weights like we do on Lake Erie to get your stick baits down a little bit deeper. Anything on that, Shane?
Yeah, again, probably the biggest difficulty when you're fishing that first few weeks in April is you're fishing so shallow that divers tend not to be all that productive because you're fishing so shallow. You want to let out as much line, more line out away from the boat as you can, because the brown trout are generally very wary of your boat and your boat presence. So having a bit of a lead length is nice. Divers tend to not allow you to do that because it achieves depth very efficiently. So yeah, generally I tend not to run too much in the way of divers, even cookie divers at that time of the year. Also too, they sink. So as you turn the boat, either going in to shallower water or trying to go out deeper, as soon as you turn the boat and it's on the slow side, the divers will sink, and they'll sink fast enough to go to the bottom in a quick hurry. And then you end up having to clear zebra mussels off. Lead core line seems to sink at a slower rate. You can get away with it a little bit easier. And even snap weights, you can adjust the amount of lead that you use in a snap weight so that it doesn't sink quite as fast. So if you use, like, let's say a 1 ounce snap weight versus, sorry, I'm trying to find the graphic here. Where is it? It's after the line right there. So you're going to use a snap weight, but the weight of the snap could justify how much line you can let out to get away from the boat.
Another question we have here is, have you found differences in forgiveness with braid versus wire while using divers and lost fish? Personally, I've lost more fish when using wire. No, Dave, I can't say that I've lost more fish with one or the other. Again, I think it more depends kind of on your drag settings and what you're using with or without snubbers and what your leaders are. I'm not sure. Maybe Dave, are you are you breaking off, or are you just, or your hook's not setting? What it could, that would help clarify that. We'll give Dave just a moment to type in his response there. So, but
Yeah.
if you're, if I guess if you're breaking off, then your leaders are probably too light, and your drags are maybe set too tight. Is what I would say.
Yeah, just to expand on that too, not all diver rods are the same.
Hmm.
Uh, there are diver rods that are very stout, very, very stout, and um, they may not be as forgiving as some other diver rods. So I actually have two different sets of diver rods. One is more stout than the others. One for using those 124 divers, the big mag divers, is a more stout rod, for an example, versus using the 107s, which are I can use a slightly lighter action diver rod.
Hmm.
I even go to a even lighter diver rod when I'm talking about walleyes, but we're just talking salmon tonight.
No. Um, I think we're caught up on questions in the chat box. If anyone has any more questions, oh, we did miss one. Do you find the UV spoons are more effective than ones without the UV coating? Um, I know when the sun is up, I often make a point of putting out UV spoons because I feel they catch the light a little bit more then. Um, but yeah, no, there certainly is a time and a place, and the same can be said, for glow glow spoons versus not glow spoons. Um, and I guess maybe we can just touch on spoon color a little more. We did a little bit earlier, but in the mornings on a typical day, anything that's, I'm looking at that one that's kind of top center almost there, Shane. Black, green, and glow patterns are often, pretty productive in the mornings and the evenings, or on an overcast day. And then as the sun comes up, then we're using, spoons that more or a chrome or silver base with a lot more. It'll depend on the depth, of course, that you're targeting. If we're fishing up higher, then we're into more, mixed veggies, oranges, and chartreuses. Then as we get down deeper, it's a lot more greens and some UVs and even some purples. What's your take on spoon color selection, Shane?
Yeah, very much the same. In fact, maybe one of the first spoons that I'll run, it'll actually be the ultra green, ultra glow. So in this photo, for an example, that Wonder Bread is actually an ultra glow. As that Easter egg, the one with the pink dots with the green and black dots as well. That one's a really good one for me first thing in the morning as well. Some of those spoons actually have glow on the back side as well. So, you know, the first light or in the dark still, um, the bait might be glowing entirely both back and front. Meanwhile, as the sun starts to finally come up, then it still could be that Easter egg type color, but with a chrome back that starts catching. And then I really like, like you mentioned, the black with the kind of like the Dave Salmon slapper colors.
NBK.
NBK, yes. Then you start to transition into the sun, but they like that black and they like the green with a glow, and that's up till about 7 o'clock, right?
Mhm.
7 o'clock, and then you start getting to a lot more of those silver finishes. You see confusion there, which is right next to Wonder Bread. It's got the blue dots, the green dots with chartreuse on a completely chrome blank. That would be like my midday spoon. Bright sunny skies. I love to have that kind of a bright sheen in my spread when I'm fishing midday.
Yeah. Another question I saw that we missed earlier is color of divers. Do we take that into consideration when we're setting things up? And I'll often intentionally use a colored diver when I'm fishing a spoon behind it, and that'll act as an attractor for that. But when I'm using flashers and flies or flasher and meat rigs, I'm usually a black or a clear diver myself, just because I don't really want to think about it. I don't want to think that it has an impact on it. It's just one less thing that's out of my mind. But maybe a green diver generally doesn't hurt because green is good for many things in many situations. But that's how I feel. I'll use colored divers and colored jets, of course, and we'll talk about that on for Lake Erie walleye. Those certainly have a time and place, and I think you feel the same as I do for the most part for diver colors, right, Shane?
Yeah, I like black. I like the black divers almost exclusively when it comes to salmon, with the exception of red. So again, with running the red Dodger, red Spin Doctor, and fly for cohos, I'll match it up with a red diver as well. But sometimes I'll run a matching diver with the flasher fly, for an example, or spoon. If I know that that's a productive color, you don't necessarily want to get caught up in mixing and matching colors, I find. So if you're trying to figure out what colors are going to get bit, don't run a different colored diver with a different color spoon trailing behind it or flash or fly. It's really not going to tell you a whole lot. If you pair it up, at least it'll provide you something to either say, yeah, the fish are honing in on that color, or they're not. Black tends to be neutral, so it takes that part of the guesswork out of it. So if it's a diver color that's black or no color at all, then it provides, you're concentrating on what's trailing behind it as being your determination of what color is going to catch you more fish.
Yeah. We had a question here about running a cheater spoon. And he's wondering, is there a connection that you can use that is a little more forgiving than just a snap swivel, because a snap swivel can be hard on the line. There are different, some snap swivels out there that I've seen that have a little bit of a coating around them, so that when they slide down the lines, they I guess they won't bang up the line at all. I can't say that I've noticed it a lot myself, but I'm always checking my lines pretty often. There are ways too that you can fix them, by using an offshore clip, or using there's a Dreamweaver has the Alberta clipper, which is a way that you can, fix your second spoon line on there. And Shane, what did you have to say about that?
If we're talking about free sliders, so often the terminology that you hear is cheaters or stackers. They're a little bit different if you really want to talk about it in trying to define them. A free slider is where you have a segment of line with a snap swivel on either side, one with your spoon and one that clips around your main line, and then slides down to the bend or the apex of the line. If you think about it, and I don't have a graphic here to show, but from the rod tip down to the release clip on the cannonball, downrigger weight, the line isn't a straight line from the rod tip straight down. It generally has a bow in the line because of the resistance or the line being pulled through the water. So that arch in the line, the slider will find its way halfway down, generally halfway down or slightly deeper than halfway, to what is the apex of that arch, the furthest back away from the boat in that arch. And that spoon will run at that different depth. And but one of the things that I've come to prefer, sliders often do, you lose a lot of fish on sliders, but one of the things I'd like to do is to prevent them from breaking off my main line spoon. So your main line trailing behind your downrigger cannonball weight is your main line spoon. Could be tracing back, let's say 15 or 20 feet. And then you have a slider that's halfway up, and you get a fish on. Often, if your snap swivel that's attached around the main line slides all the way down, once you've released it off the release clip, slides all the way down to the front of your mainline spoon. If it's not large enough, it could bust the snap swivel off and lose the whole works. You lose the fish, you lose both your slider, all your equipment, as well as your mainline spoon, because it's smashed into the knot on your main line that's tied onto your spoon that's on the main line. What I'd like to do is use an oversized snap swivel. Maybe that size 4 that you see on the screen there allows that part of the snap swivel to go over top of the mainline snap swivel, and even right to the nose of the spoon. So it's not sitting on monofilament line. You're not fighting that fish on top of mono. It's instead the snap swivel has found its way over top of metal, and now you're less likely to break your line off. So that's one of the things that I do recommend, is going to a larger size snap swivel that goes around your main line.
No. Thanks, Shane. Well, I think we've hit the 2-hour mark now. It's been it flew by like these always do. I think maybe we'll wrap it up for now. And we greatly appreciate everyone that came out. And again, if you were late joining, we are recording this, and this will be up on our Grimsby Tackle YouTube channel in a couple days' time, probably by Monday. We'll have it cleaned up and up there. And in the meantime, there's lots of other resources for you to, dive into throughout the next little while before spring comes. If you use social media, there's some good pages that you can follow. Mark Kulak has his Lake Ontario, Canada reports page, and he's always putting up some different informative videos of his own. Russell Gahagan, the owner of Salmon Candy, and also he's got his page called Russell's Fishing Tech. He's got lots of different informative videos and topics up there. There's a bunch of websites out there, Spoon Pullers, Lake Ontario United, Great Lakes Angler. You can go on Shane's website. He's got a number of blogs and past fishing reports on there that you can refer to with a ton of great information. And as always, Shane and I are always very accessible. Shane through the Fantastic Instagram or Facebook page or his website, or myself through the Grimsby Tackle platforms. We're always available and happy to help and get everyone pointed in the right direction. So thanks, Shane, for hanging out again.
It was great. I always enjoy these seminars and being able to join in on some of the questions that come in. Really appreciate. I think I saw the numbers as high as 68. So we had a good number of participants there. And for those that hung around to the end here to do some of the question and answer, thanks for sticking around. And I hope everyone's having a great start to your year. It's unfortunate about COVID, but hey, we'll get through this. Yeah. We'll get back out fishing in the spring too.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, we'll see you. We'll see you, everybody, next time. Stay tuned. We'll probably have another one in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. So take care until then, and we'll sign off.
All right. Thanks, Mark. See you now.